I am Lindsay LaFerrier, a senior manager at the Partnership for Public Service, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to today's conversation about our research into the American public's trust in government. If you're unfamiliar with the partnership, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization building a better government and stronger democracy. For today's conversation, I'm joined by two of my fantastic colleagues at the partnership. Paul Hitlin is a senior research manager who has been with the partnership for almost 4 years and leads our trust in government research. He also works on the partnership's effort to help presidential transition planning. Previously, Paul worked at the Pew Research Center for more than a decade. We're also joined by Nadzeya Shutava. She is a researcher who has been with the partnership for 2.5 years, working on our trust research from the very beginning of the project's development. She also works on our government customer experience portfolio. So Paul and Nadzeya, really excited to talk about our trust in government work today. Before we dive into some of our research findings on this topic and what it might take for us to rebuild trust, let's start out with something very fundamental. Paul, why did the partnership take on this work? Why is public trust in government important?
That is, that's so bad. I shouldn't be. Okay, that was weird. Sorry about that. Thank you, Lindsay. So there's a number of reasons why trust in government is important. Some of them are probably more obvious than others, but one thing, when people have low trust in government, they tend to participate less in civic activities like voting or interacting with federal or elected officials or agencies. People tend to feel less empowered that they can actually have an influence on government. Low trust also makes it harder for agencies to tackle the problems that they need to work on. When people have low levels of trust, they're less likely to listen to guidelines or recommendations or heed warnings from the government. And there's also two other things that I think are to me a little less obvious, but also really important and something that the partnership works a lot on. And one is recruiting. The government needs good talent, especially young talent. And so when people are not as trusting of the government, it makes it a little less attractive for people to go work for the government. And lastly, I would say that in order for the government to continue to reform and improve itself, which it should be doing constantly, it needs resources and it needs time and support. And so when people trust the government less, they're less likely to support giving more resources to the government. So you almost get this sort of cyclical thing where in order to improve itself, the government needs time and money, and yet people sometimes are less likely to give that if they don't trust that the government is doing what it can in the best possible way.
Thanks, Paul. And I think we know, to solve a problem, you first need to understand the problem. And if we want a government that is more trustworthy and has the trust of the public, we need to understand what the current state is. So Nadzeya, what does our research tell us about the current state of public perceptions of government?
Yes. Thank you for the question. And thanks, Paul, for starting us on the importance of this topic. So far, the partnership conducted 2 nationally representative public opinion surveys in 2021 and in 2022. And both times we received similar results for the overall level of trust in the federal government. According to our latest data, 2022, only about 1/3 of our respondents indicate that they trust the federal government, 35%. And that is compared to 46% of those who indicated that they do not trust the federal government. That was somewhat expected, but we wanted to also dig a little bit deeper into this data and ask the question from different perspectives, from a number of different angles, formulated it a little bit differently. And we got the following results. We understood that more people feel that the government has a negative impact on the country. 53% of people indicated that, and only 42% of people believe that the federal government has a positive impact on the country. Also, only 1/3 of people believe that the government helps people like them. We also asked questions about state government and local government, and those are viewed more positively than the federal government. So in both cases, the majority of our respondents indicated that they trust both local and state government. Local government got 58% of popular support and 53% for state government. We also really wanted to find some positive trends and tendencies in the whole topic and issue of trust in government. So we asked questions about different agencies. We asked about 13 of them. And 12 of them were viewed positively by our respondents and some by quite wide margins. For example, the National Park Service was seen favorably by 84% of Americans, which is a very strong majority, and also Social Security Administration was viewed favorably by 69% of our respondents. We also, in line with our main mission, asked questions about civil servants, several questions on those. And we understood that civil servants are generally seen positively by 62% of our respondents, and they're also seen as competent, more than as incompetent, and far more Americans also agree that civil servants are doing public service and said they are hard workers. So these are just some of the data points that we cover in our research. And back to you, Lindsay.
Thanks, Nadia. As a group of folks who work every day with civil servants, it's nice to hear that there is some silver lining in some of our findings, and that there is work the government needs to do. So I think, Paul, to answer the next kind of logical step here. So what does this tell us? We know that there's negative views of government overall, but there are some more positive views when you ask about agencies or civil servants. So what does it tell us about how we go about rebuilding that relationship between government and the public?
So that is the essential question, of course. And I think, if I might say, I think one of the ways that the research that we're doing in the partnership is pretty unique is that we're looking into solutions. So we're looking into ways that the government can do things and talk better and serve people better. And it's obviously an area of work that we have a lot of more work to do, but I'll be happy to share some of our initial findings and recommendations. One thing that's very clear is it's really important how the government interacts with the American people. We often talk about this in terms of customer service. So when people call to ask questions about their taxes or file a passport or vote, those interactions are as efficient and positive as can be. That's obviously a key part of how people interact with the government. Nadia mentioned that there's a large conception that the government does not work for all Americans. A lot of people feel that it doesn't work for them. So I think it's really important that agencies and leaders in government talk about and make sure that they're addressing all Americans, regardless of location or any other type of characteristic. We've done some preliminary research that has shown some promising things. Again, we have a lot more work to do in here, but what we found through some of our anecdotal work and some focus groups is that telling people personal stories about federal workers, particularly federal workers who are doing really great and important work, seems to have a really strong, get a really strong reaction. And the Partnership for Public Service does our award ceremony, the SAMBs, as we call them, gives out awards to really important or high-performing public servants and telling their stories. What we've seen showing videos is that, again, people have really positive, strong reactions. And not only do they think that those individuals are really positive, but they do say to themselves that must be more common in the government than perhaps they had thought. So that's something that we are encouraging people to talk about a lot more. And the last couple of things I'll say is we think it's really important that agencies focus on communicating what their mission is and why they're doing the work they're doing, really talk about the big picture and how it impacts people. And lastly, in some of the message testing and looking at, we definitely know that the ideas of safety and security are ideas that are well received by people across the political spectrum. So to really focus on how the government is helping people be safe and secure, and not just in terms of national security, although that's really important, but also in terms of economic safety, food safety, health, weather, all those sorts of things as well.
Thank you, Paul. And for anyone who hasn't looked at our Service to America Medals website, it's at servicetoamericamedals.org. There are some really inspiring stories of public servants who are dedicated to making all of our lives better. So Nadia, I know we threw out a lot of findings to people about how we have understood current perceptions of government. And one of the exciting things for our team today is that we just launched a new dashboard looking at our trust in government data, which may help people visualize some of the things we talked about today when there were a lot of numbers. So could you tell us or show us the dashboard and what makes it exciting for people to see our work in this new way?
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy to share my screen. And hopefully you're seeing the dashboard right now, and I'm very excited to be the one showcasing it for our audience. It's our newest product around trust and showing the results of our research on trust. So some of these points I already covered. We can see that here we have the question of how much do you trust the federal government, and we see the data that I already voiced out to answer Lindsay's question. So 35% of respondents indicated that they trust the government, and 46% did not trust the government. Now, if we go to the drop-down menu, we can also look at the data broken down by different demographic groups. So, for example, political affiliation. We have found out that this is one of the strongest, if not the strongest predictor of trust in government. So if we look at data on Democrats, we can see that 52% of them indicated that they trust the government versus in case those respondents who self-identified as Republicans, only 23% of them trust the government. And then you can also see the data on independent respondents. And what's interesting about this visualization is that you can also, so if you hover over one of the data points, neutral, do not trust, and trust, you can see the data highlighted in the visualization. If you actually click on it, it's going to disappear from your visualization, and you're going to see the one data point that you're interested in potentially. So we can see here for independence, neutral, the neutral number is 16%. So that's some of the cool things that you can do using this dashboard, and some of the data that you can uncover for yourself. And hopefully it will be useful for your general education, just out of curiosity, or even for some products that you are working on. Now, some of the points, if we go to the next page, here are some of the points that I mentioned: impact the federal government has on the United States, impact on people like you. And we asked several characteristics of the federal government, and saw if people were agreeing that those are actually accurate. And here we have some functions of the federal government, and also asked people whether they thought that the government actually achieved those goals of keeping people safe, serving community, and doing other things, as you can see here. One more point, there's a lot more data points, but one more that I wanted to show is how people view different services that the federal government is providing. And Paul talked how we view customer experience as very important in our organization, and it's generally considered a factor in how much people trust the federal government. So we can see different services here. For example, applied for a passport. We can see that 52% of our respondents have applied for a passport, and of those, 88% were satisfied, and only 6% were not satisfied. So that's a pretty good level of satisfaction. We were pleasantly surprised by those results. We can see a service that hopefully most people use: filed several taxes. 93% of our respondents have filed several taxes, and out of those, 74% indicated that they were satisfied with this service, and only 18% were not satisfied. So we view this as one of those positive trends that we were really eager to uncover in the general topic of public trust in government. And I'm pausing my share.
Thank you, Nadia. I know we're all very excited to have this out into the world and let people explore more about what we found related to public perceptions of government. So Paul, before we go, I know we have one last exciting tidbit to share that's new for our team. So as Nadzeya just said, we know that some experience with accessing federal services can be higher. So you have people who have filed federal taxes, who've gone through airport security, social security benefits. So based on some of our recent research, how do people compare their own experiences acting with government to the experiences of other people?
So that's a really good question, and I think a really important question. In order to answer this, I also get to introduce a sort of a new a piece of work for us, and I will get back to the specific answer to your question. What Nadzeya just showed, and all of the numbers we talked about thus far, have come from our nationally representative surveys. As she said, we've done 2 in recent years. We're starting now to do a different type of survey in order to learn some more things. If we can go ahead and share the slide, that would be helpful. We're calling these pulse check surveys. And what we're doing is an online survey of about 1,000 people, Americans, and asking them very questions. This is allowing us to do more surveys, doing them more quickly, not as expensive. They are not nationally representative, just the nature of using online panels. But we did do a lot of work using what is called quota sampling to try and get these to approximate the general public as best we can, although again, we understand there's some limitations. So in order to answer your question, Lindsay, I want to just point out what this chart is showing us. And that is, we ask people 2 related questions. And one is, basically about your personal experiences. Do you agree or disagree that personal experiences with the federal government have been mostly positive? And what we got was a 53% agreed and 34% disagreed. So that's more than half of people saying that the majority of their experiences, again, with the federal government have been positive, which is a pretty high number. I will say we're trying not to do too much comparison between these different type of polls because they are different methodologies. We have asked similar questions in our nationally representative surveys, and the numbers are not quite as high, but they're not that far different. Just as a side note there. But at the same time, with our online poll, we also asked about your perception of the people of the country in general. And so a lower percentage, you can see there 38% of people said that they think the experiences of most people have been positive. So there's this 15-point difference between people who say, I've had good experiences, from those who say that they think that's generally what people have overall. And another way of thinking about that is there's a lot of people who seem to think that while they themselves have had good experiences, they're sort of lucky, or they're the exception to the rule rather than the rule. And actually, when you dig into this data a little bit more, about a quarter of the people who said that they have had mostly positive experiences also say that that's not the case with people around the country. And that actually, if you do the math, comes out to about 15% of the people in the country, or in the poll that we did on this. So, you know, we spend a lot of time talking about how much of this issue is a service problem versus a messaging problem. Obviously, it's both. It's not one or the other. But I think to me, this finding is an interesting way to look at part of the messaging challenge. So you have a fair number of people who are saying that they're having good experiences, but that they don't seem to think that's universal. And that is a challenge, how you can demonstrate that and get people to understand that their good experience working with somebody was not unique. That's actually much more common than they would think.
Thanks for sharing this, Paul. And like Paul said, we're excited to do this new type of survey to help us understand things in a different light and be able to have more timely responses to things that are going on in our country. And I think, like you just alluded to with that finding, there's a lot more work we want to do here to understand what's underlying some of these conversations and dynamics. So thank you all for joining us today. We're excited to talk more about the partnerships, rebuilding trust in government work. Thank you to Paul and Nadzeya for sharing some of your expertise with us as 2 folks who worked on this portfolio for a long time. Rebuilding trust and trustworthiness in our government is obviously of critical importance to the partnership, and we believe to the country. So we're excited to have this conversation continue. If you're interested in learning more and engaging in this work. We hope you'll join us for our Trust in Government Summit on September 27th, where we're going to talk more about this, dig into some of these topics a bit more, and start to think about what we can all do to help bridge this trust gap in the US. So with that, thank you. It was great to speak with everyone today, and we'll be seeing you soon.
Thank you.